Let's go ahead and get started. So our next topic, we have a 45-minute panel discussion. I should start out by saying the remainder of today's workshop is really going to be a more collaborative, a more discussion-based, and more interactive, hopefully, series of talks, although today has been quite interactive. So thank you for that. It's been a very vibrant session so far. Our next topic, though, our next discussion topic is a panel, and it's for CVE in the vulnerability management ecosystem, looking at program growth, opportunities, and challenges. Great panel. I'll be moderating. I have a series of questions to ask. You may have questions to ask. We're going to certainly have questions in the following topic as well, where we have an open floor Q&A discussion. But I think the panelists would agree with me that if you do have a question to ask, we'd love to hear it. And maybe we'll jump from there. I'll be keeping an eye on the chat and the Q&A to share questions as they come in. Of course, I knew that my dogs would bark at some point. And they just did.
Didn't hear a thing, Alec.
What's that?
I didn't hear a thing.
Oh, perfect. All right.
Totally cut it out.
Well done, Zoom. Okay. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. I'd like to introduce our panelists. We have Chris Coffin, who is on camera, as you can see, myself, who is on camera, as you can see. We also will have Art Manion, Kent Landfield, and Lisa Olson, who I think will all be joining us perhaps on camera, perhaps not. But this is really going to have a two-phased approach for this conversation. The idea being that we will have sort of the first phase sort of thinking about CVE program from a historical sort of review and reflection perspective. We have a series of questions, one for each panelist on that sort of notion, looking back and then sort of growth to where we are. And then the second phase looking more at sort of the path forward, right? The look ahead, new challenges, opportunities in the next 25 years of the program. So I'd like to start it out really with the first question for Kent, and that is, can you speak to some of the driving forces behind the creation of the CVE program in the late 90s? So how did the sort of original goals, the problems, what was the problem and the mission, to address that problem that took shape?
A lot of this was because, first off, cybersecurity was really starting to become important as we're starting to see more and more types of intrusions into networks as people were trying to experiment and the like. We were having issues across the board. At the time, defense in depth was really the focus. That defense in depth a lot of times it was about firewalls and intrusion detection systems and watching what's going across your wire. Well, we had an issue that came up from one three-letter agency in a discussion with some of the industry tool vendors that, we're getting ourselves killed here. And we had seen it internally, but they voiced it first. We're getting ourselves killed here because ISS, Internet Security Systems, had one set of signatures that would alert. I came out of Network Flight Recorder. We had another set of signatures that would alert. And there were other vendors out there. I think there were 4 or 5 at the time. And every time an alert went off that was common among us then, which was for all intent and purposes quite often, the emergency response teams, the incident response teams would have to go and figure out, is this one event or is this 5 events? And this got really old, got really expensive, cost-wise, human-wise. And so the idea came up from a paper that was written by Steve Christie and Dave Mann and presented at a Purdue conference, and it was well received. There were people like Alan Powler who used to run SANS. Alan's left us, but his legacy lives on. It was It was his idea to get the vendors directly related with the paper authors and really have that discussion. And we did that in May of 1999. There were, I think, something like 12 different vendors that got together. And we thought this was a great idea, and we wanted to do it. We put there were a few that MITRE had established to sort of show and examples of and the like, and we put those into our products so that we could actually see what was occurring. It was an immediate result, an immediate positive result. It was obvious to those that had installed CVE into their logs and into their alerts that this was the same event. So we were immediately cutting down on the amount of effort that U.S. agencies, companies, my own included, because we did have more than one IDS. It was a really good result. And that sort of jump-started hey, this works. And we have real proof immediately. And it was something that, from that point forward, sort of grew as other people learned about it and wanted to be a part of it and started to incorporate the CVEs that were identified into their logging mechanisms.
Yeah. Thanks, Kent. That's great. And from there, I sort of want to turn to Chris next with sort of the idea of, okay, it's been 25 years. We had that initial starting point. We had initial successes. Could you share an example of a particularly tough decision early on, right, or a course correction that the CVE program had to make, the challenge that we were facing, what lessons were learned, and maybe something that can carry forward as well with us as we continue on our discussion?
Yeah, I think there's no question for me, and others may disagree, but I think the biggest turning point for the CVE program, and the one that caused, I think, a lot of controversy, was when we decided that in order to scale, we needed to find better ways of producing CVEs. And, I don't know how many on the call are aware, but 2016 timeframe, everything before that, the MITRE program or MITRE produced all CVE records. And we were essentially the one providing all the content. And around the 2016, 2017 timeframe, we started asking CNAs for help. And there was, the controversy, I guess, comes from, did we think that the CNAs would want to help and provide more information? There were definitely some that didn't think that CNAs, such as you guys on the call, would want to do that. And I think we were pleasantly surprised that once we put that stick out there, that a lot of CNAs jumped on it because they wanted to have, more control and more input into what went into CVEs. And, ultimately, you guys are the ones that understand the issues better. And it ended up being, I think, wildly successful. So I think that was probably the biggest turning point for the program.
Thanks, Chris. That's great. Yeah. So You mentioned sort of that pivot point, looking back, 2016, 2017 timeframe. Art, when we think about that timeframe and the rapid modernization and sort of the change in how CVE assignment is being made, some of the other things that we changed as well as a program include, governance, program rules, for example. How do you think these things have impacted the program's relevance in today's security landscape? And can you reflect a little bit on that time as we establish those changes too?
Sure. So Chris sort of covered part of this, but credit to the program for recognizing that there was a scaling issue. Federation distributing the work was a major milestone and a major shift for the program. I think we're experiencing something similar today. To continue to expand numbers of CNAs, and there's been a focus even on this, this meeting, this workshop, on sort of delegating more authority and responsibility to the CNAs. So that model shift, I think, is an enormous milestone. It almost can't be understated, right? It's scalable. It puts sort of the effort where the least cost avoider, right? The folks developing or producing the software probably know what it should be called. probably know something about the vulnerability. They're fixing the vulnerability. Right? CVE in this case is capturing knowledge that they have firsthand, and that's just, to me, that's clearly a much longer lasting, more robust, scalable model than what we tried before. We've mentioned a couple of names from the past. I think I mentioned Dave Mann yesterday, and Steve Christie-Coley's been mentioned a couple of times. Before the 2016, 2017 inflection point, and I don't remember exactly when. And somebody from MITRE, please correct me if I'm wrong, but it's my impression that Steve Christie-Coley, the single human, wrote nearly every single CVE record by hand, a lot of them by hand. Back in those days when I was newer to the program, I could sort of tell by looking at the record if he had written it or not. So just to point out, he put a huge effort in, but it was sort of John Henry versus the distributed industrial steam hammer, and indeed, a single person as good as Steve is could not keep up. So that inflection point to a distributed model is absolutely key to our success, and we're still doing that to this day.
Yeah, thanks, Art. And Lisa, just reflecting on that too, I know that you represent a CNA. You get a lot of attention as a CNA, but you're also a strong advocate for the CNA sort of really being the impact and value of the CVE program, to a certain extent. Can you talk a little bit about that? Oh, you're muted, Lisa. Sorry.
When a few of us on the board were working on the 25th anniversary document for the CVE program, we had a lot of time to reflect back on everything. And I suggested at one point that, as we celebrate this year of the 25th year of the program, this should really be the year of the CNAs, because the CNAs have sort of taken over the program in some ways from, not that MITRE doesn't play a key role in keeping things going and doing all the work that the care and feeding of the program that it needs, but really the bread and butter is now given over to the CNAs, and we got to do this together. And it's our program now. And one thing, I got much more involved in the program when I started working with the board and joining working groups. And we all really have a really big voice. And you can have, significant influence on the program, and the program will change. If you feel strongly and you want it to go a certain direction, get involved, because we really do hold the power now to change it and improve it and get it to be better.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. That's a great point, and it's a good plug for working groups. We have a lot of working groups focusing in particular areas, particular domains. If you're interested and you haven't had a chance to participate, you're most welcome to reach out and join. So we talked a little bit about the expansion of CVE. We're going to sort of start to pivot towards sort of the new era. But before we do that, and maybe as a segue, Kent, I wanted to think a little bit about the expansion of the program from a particular sense of international participation, right? International participation and collaboration. How has the international community contributed to the program's growth and success, and how do you see that going forward?
Sort of interesting. We started working with the international community in 2014. I think there was what was the name of it? It was the first event that we held around vulnerability reporting in Kyoto. And it was a really enjoyable event. We had PCERs from all over Southeast Asia and Taiwan, Korea, Japan that were all there to sort of talk to us about what they were doing and how they were using CVE, which was very enlightening to me. A lot of them had already mapped their databases from their own internal ID structures to CVEs. And so they were saying that they use CV quite a bit. At that point in time, the board started talking more and more about where CV should go from an international perspective. That was actually a good thing. Recently, though, a few years back, there was the European Union has put an effort they call NIS in place. And it was a basic first jump at cybersecurity for the European Union. They updated that. And when they updated that, they talked about actually going to create their own ID system. In the initial kind of documentation that was coming out from the rapporteur, there was some extreme concern within the cybersecurity community. There was going to be a divergence of ID space, which doesn't benefit anyone. There was a great deal of lobbying that went on with a few organizations, with the European Union, the rapporteur, members of European Parliament. And the final NIS2 directive actually states that they should be involved with organizations like CVE, and they called us out directly in it. So that was a positive. The ANISA European Union is going to be, or I think they are stood up now, sort of an operational center for all the countries to be able to report various cybersecurity related issues, including new vulnerabilities. I and a couple others had discussions with them about, why don't you guys become a CNA? Why don't you become, a top level root? And to their credit, they said, can we start at the bottom and work up? Can we, learn to crawl before we walk, before we run? And that, the SPWG and the board authorized that was a perfect example of what we wanted to have happen. So that presentation was given back to them, and it was pushed quite a bit throughout the EU. That's been very positive. We've also had Japanese contingent within started out as a CNA and now they're a root, and their focus has been very, very helpful in trying to sort of expand that international flavor. So what we're seeing, really, for all intent and purposes, there's a lot more coordination going on with foreign governments and regional governments, which is a positive. We have many different countries represented, 40 plus countries represented, 40 countries today, they're using CVE. We're actually starting to see this grow, not just in the databases as a mapping key, but as a driving force for some of their types of incident response processes and the like. So it's growing. It's great for the program. We wanted to federate it. We wanted to make sure that it was useful and valuable to everyone, and we're getting there.
Thanks, Kent. That's great. Yeah. So, as we start to pivot sort of to looking to now and looking ahead, Art, I'm thinking, there's a lot of emerging challenges that we face, right? As a program, there's new technologies, there's all sorts of other things, and we'll get into the nitty gritty. But at the top level, sort of, what do you think comes to mind when we think about the program staying relevant, thinking about the next 25 years, some of the challenges that we face at this point going forward?
Well, I always try to keep in mind, and I think the program has, encountered head-on this condition a couple of times, right? CVE we have history. We are perhaps a de facto sort of standard for identifying vulnerabilities, but there's no planetary law that says everyone must use CVE to identify vulnerabilities. There are a number of other ID systems out there. We mentioned Japan. There's a giant country over there that has 4 or 5 different databases that are semi-public. They cross-reference CVE sometimes in China, sometimes they don't. We have it's funny, when you say planetary, we're pretty quickly get into some geopolitical stuff that isn't exactly the program's problem, but it's also something we can't completely avoid. So there's going to be some issues, I think, there with truly, we're taking a serious look at really improving our international focus. We succeed, I think, by being a very good, high quality identifier, right? Others have come along and have been maybe arguably faster or something, but they haven't had huge adoption. And that's, again, they're choices, right? But the program has a lot of very legitimate, I think, credibility. But it's because we adapt, and we're going to be facing some more of that. So sort of true globalization, I think, will be something coming up. I am heartened to be having the discussions about CPE, trying to address what I generally call the naming problem. It turns out, and this happened on day one, right? The first vulnerability published on the internet, or CVE 1999. I'm not sure the first number we issued wasn't 001, but maybe it was, right? Probably said, I'm not sure it was back in the day, right? SendMail has a vulnerability, and for sure you had to identify SendMail, the software, and some version, and a patch, and a fixed version. So vulnerability identifiers in databases like CVE have been, I'd say, almost stumbling along for their entire lifespan, not really having a consistent way to name the software that's affected or not. So we are really, truly, finally, I think, looking at that. The CPE and the PURL discussion from yesterday are a step in that direction. I think that's going to be key for the program going forward. And I've got a sort of couple of personal issues, not those kinds of personal issues, that I sort of keep track of with CVE. And one of them I always find humorous is stated in the 1999 paper. I think we're going to need some things to help grow, for instance, the ability for a CVE ID to cross-reference in a in very explicit way another CVE ID. Is duplicate of, is sort of parent or child of, things like that I think are going to be necessary to scale. And tying that one off, I'm also heartened to have discussions about, hey, Lisa, I see you there, so I'll say Microsoft, right? Microsoft Windows uses curl, right? Curl, the open source, sort of Linux-y oriented command line and web client library, and might be affected or not affected by an upstream vulnerability in curl. How, in the CVE program, does Microsoft express that? Microsoft is doing a great job. There's a Microsoft security update guide that says Office and Windows are affected by a curl vulnerability, and it's fixed because Microsoft updated curl. Excellent. You can't express that in CVE today, and I think that's going to be necessary moving forward also.
Thanks, Art. Yeah, lots of great stuff there. So when we think about the current state of the program, Chris, and we're talking about 400 plus CNAs, thousands of new CVEs annually, putting it minimally, many thousands, we should say. And you being a chair of the quality working group, right? This is a thought as we continue to scale this program. Can you speak a little bit about how you foresee the program maintaining the quality and accuracy of CVE records, or rather even maybe, from another perspective, increasing, right? The need to increase quality and accuracy of CVE records. How do you foresee that playing out? You're muted, sir.
That would help. I guess just to start that off, I would say it's not just on the quality working group. So it's going to be a combination of things like the quality working group and the CNA rules and other parts of the program. And combined, that I think all those things can help data quality. But specifically with regards to like the quality working group, we cover the CVE record format. And there's a lot of, I think, areas in the CVE record format today where I think we can do a better job of, defining what values we expect and what those values should look like. And, I hate to say it because it makes everybody nervous, but, maybe there is room for requiring other pieces of data down the road that will be helpful to consumers. And I think the only way we understand how to get there is, and this is something actually that we're talking about in the quality working group today, is who are the consumers of CVE? And I think it's more than what you might think of off the top of your head, because obviously we have direct consumers of CVEs that are scanning tool vendors and dictionaries that take the entire CVE list and use that for some purpose. But then there's also the downstream users of those tools and those dictionaries. And what do they expect in the data? And are we providing all that data? Are we doing it in a consistent way? And are we helping our consumers? I think these are the kinds of questions we need to answer. And I think we even still need to understand who those consumers are and really pinpoint those and figure out, what they want to see. And that may involve going out to the community and getting some feedback directly. But yeah, so as we grow in CNAs and as more and more people participate in the program and provide us data, I think we're going to have to, at the same time, do a better job of, filtering that data and making sure that we're presenting it in the right way and collecting the right data.
And I think in some respects as well, Chris, it's going to come down to two aspects. One is automation, better automation, being able to really specify that from a machine perspective so that we can make it easier for CNAs to produce consistent information in the right formats and the like. And then the education aspects of really, this is a transient kind of community, sadly. We have a lot of folks that come in and out of PCERTs because of corporate reorganizations or mergers and acquisitions or people just moving on career-wise. So there's going to have to be education that is easy enough to consume that allows them to understand really what is a quality record, what are the quality areas that they should be focusing on. So I think automation, better tools to do things that make it easier, and combine that with education will go a long way to producing better quality CV across the board.
Right. So
yeah, and actually, automation is a great point. Oh, go ahead, Alec.
If you have a follow-on, please go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say automation is a great point, Kent, and I think that to give an example, concrete that we were talking about recently was CPE. And we have this great client tool called Bonogram that a lot of you are probably pretty familiar with. We'll have to create some automation around, or we should create some automation around CPE. So for instance, you go and enter your product conversion data into Bonogram, and maybe that starts building a CPE for you and gives you a hint. So you don't necessarily have to understand the CPE syntax as well as an expert. You can just let it build it for you and tweak it how you need. And maybe that also applies to some automation around the user registry that some of you might be familiar with, and storing some of that CPE data so you don't have to define it every time. So yeah, I think automation plays a big part, Ken.
Thanks, Ken. Thanks, Chris. Yes. So education, automation, these things that are all important for data quality. One of the other things that we've talked about the last couple of days, at least we've touched on in a couple of talks, Lisa, is this idea of new technologies, right? And the CVE program needing to provide or to evolve and have a position, let's say guardrails on what is the responsibility of the CVE program, what is something where, yeah, this is a bad problem, but it's not a CVE related topic. I'm thinking specifically potentially about certain types of bad outcomes related to certain technologies. I'm thinking specifically about what these new technologies might come in terms of introducing or finding vulnerabilities at scale. Can you talk a little bit about that, Lisa, just from the perspective of how the CVE program needs to continue, perhaps as a thesis, you can refute it, to evolve as these things emerge?
Well, certainly, I know that certain people in the industry were working on the LLM technology for a long, long, long time. But I don't think most of the world realized it was just going to come on the scene one day and change our lives. And so we can't anticipate what's going to be out there in the next 5 years as technology really integrates into everybody's daily life in ways that we can't even imagine. And so as we heard from Eric yesterday, it's really hard to figure out what a vulnerability looks like in large language models. It's not clear. And I think as we all start living them in our day-to-day lives, it will become more and more clear. I heard about 2 new CVEs yesterday, in large language models. So I haven't had a chance to look at them yet but certainly as we see these things and it becomes clear, it's important that the CVE program stays open to it by creating the AI working group, right? Because we don't know what the answer is yet. And as I sort of anticipate that technology and human beings are going to start living together in a way that we can't anticipate today. And so when vulnerabilities become on the inside of the body, that's a whole nother realm of what are we going to do about that? And how are we going to get people to, patch their hearts, right? And so
We had that in the chat earlier today. Somebody saying, red team, I don't know what it was.
Anyway, I think that I'm a big proponent of everybody chipping in and working together. And the way the CVE program has evolved, I think we're very welcoming. I think everybody wants as much participation from active CNAs as possible, because we're the ones on the ground, putting out the CVEs and seeing a new vulnerability, because we're talking to the finders, we're talking to the researchers, and they're telling us stuff. And so I can't emphasize enough the fact that everybody needs to participate. That's what we need to make the program work for the world, which is going to help, which is going to help us all. Go ahead, Kent.
Yeah. One thing I want to mention is you touched on a very vital point to why this program is 25 years old. Evolution of this landscape has been rather dramatic, has been rather unexpected at times. And because of that, we as a CVE program have always taken a look at how it impacts the vulnerability management community and how CVE can help that community by either enhancing our data, by trying to get more input from those that we need, like the AI working group. I'm far from an AI expert, I assure everyone here, but we do have AI experts and folks that are doing this on a day-to-day basis on that AI working group. And in fact, a very good group of folks. We're in a situation right now where we evolved from the types of things that were impacting the program, like initially the data format. We only were able to do 10,000 vulnerabilities a year. Well, that went by the wayside rather quickly, and in the grand scheme of things. But we had to work with the tool vendors and explain to them what we were doing and why they needed to be able to support the changing formats. The 2016, as was alluded to earlier, it was a turning point for the program, and we really did have to change how we did governance, how we looked to the future. The whole idea of enriching with the CV record information with ADPs that are not directly CNAs, can be, but don't have to be, but have valuable information that can be mapped directly individually to the CVEs themselves and made available for downstream purposes. We are, as a community, trying to continue to evolve the program, and that evolution starts with participation.
Yeah. Thanks, Kent. Art, I wanted to ask a question that's sort of related to all this, because we talk about the evolution of the program. We've certainly talked about the rules over the last couple of days, and I know you love talking about rules. But with that in mind, one of the things that I think we have to balance as a program, and we have balanced it quite effectively, in my opinion, is this idea of sort of requirements versus consensus building versus making something easy enough such that being a requirement is a problem. Can you speak to that a little more? Because I think that's really important for the community to understand.
Yeah, no, that is absolutely a balancing act. And I think that's, that comes with, that is one of the trade-offs with having a distributed, federated, right, many people involved system is you're going to get, we've seen, without defining quality too specifically, right, we've seen greater federation, more CNAs, and greater variance, right, in quality and how records are written. To this day, there are very few, I think it is literally 3, Kent mentioned this earlier, right, required things in a CVE record. I actually will say, I think I might be too close to the problem. I think we're doing actually a pretty good job. It's not like it's easy. There's lots of discussion and debate and different opinions, but I think so far we've been successful walking the tightrope or the balance line between what's required, absolute minimum requirement, lots of optional stuff. There is certainly sort of socio-technical, right, norms and preferences and good practices are a factor. There's like sort of a soft requirement, but those things I think are having an effect. This is partly covered by, right, hey, please, not required, but we sure do like CWE, CVSS, at least the vectors, and CPE information if you can provide it. So I haven't said this recently, but I will bring it up. I'm really a minimalist at heart. I used to complain a little bit more often about, right, having CVE just be the absolute minimum necessary to identify vulnerabilities. Yes, we need severity, prioritization, all the other stuff, but let someone else do that sort of downstream in some global process. I have to admit that I'm not sure who is doing that consistently, and the choice has been support those things in the CVE system, even if they're not required yet, but allow them to exist there is probably working out reasonably well. So I think what I'll say is overall, I like the idea, and I think it's working of, right, we have generally community consensus. This sort of information would be useful, support it in the record. Hey, it turns out people are using it, right? CNAs are providing it without being required to. People downstream are using it. And over time, maybe that does become a must, or we figure out kind of where the balance is. But I think we're reaching a good balance. It is a tricky thing to continue. I mean, ADP containers, there are discussions that, and we expected this, but we weren't sure what was going to happen, right? There's 1 container, 2 container, 3 container. Maybe there's going to be 400 containers or possibly 400 containers. So it is a balancing act. I think we're doing okay, but it requires constant attention.
Yeah, no, it's a great point, and it's an ongoing challenge. And as I say, I think we've done a pretty good job with it. And as we go forward, we find ways to make the requirements as easy as possible to adopt, right? Because otherwise it becomes, like you said, it's an externality of a federated approach. And if we incorporate centralized approaches, we end up needing to enforce them, right? Either through manual ad hoc engagement or through automation, which we don't necessarily have just yet, all these kinds of things. So great points.
Sorry, could I?
Go ahead.
Do you mind? Sorry. You caused me to remember this, right? I think our very informal community policing, crowdsourcing, finding stuff that people don't really like or agree with or might be an issue works. It's not an official rule. Maybe it needs to be easier or happen more, but we do catch errors, bugs, mistakes, and changes just by being transparent and people noticing. So that's working also, just a factor. Thanks.
And to note, this is a voluntary effort. It's, no one's getting paid here except for 1 or 2 people on the screen. The rest of us are all volunteering our time and our resources to make this successful. So it's hard to say you must do something. We don't know how that's going to adversely impact your operations. We're trying to, when Art was going through the rules, we had so many discussions about how is this must going to impact, implementation of this. And we were very, very selective in where we had musts, and we wanted to try to stipulate the rules in such a way and fashion that anyone could use their good judgment to make the right decision and not force them into a situation where it was going to cost them a lot more money, a lot more time, a lot more resources, or a lot more headaches. So we don't know where those balances are, which is why yesterday I was asking folks, I want to hear from you when it comes to Q&A about, how the rules affect you, where are they succeeding? Where are they failing? I think that would be very, very telling, because we did have those hard discussions, and they were not short discussions either.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. So we have about 4 minutes. So we got 1 minute answers, hopefully, coming from each panelist. I have a sort of finishing up question for this session, this panel, which has been wonderful as we transition into that Q&A that Kent mentioned. And that's around the vision for the future. So for all panelists, you have about a minute to answer this. And I'll start with Chris. If you had to envision the CVE program 25 years from now, what would you hope to see in terms of structure, impact, reach? And if you have time, what are the steps you think that are most important to get to that, to make it a reality? Over to you, Chris.
You're on mute again.
You're muted again. You're hard muted. Tom, can we have Chris's answer? Is it too precious?
Wow.
There you
go.
That's better.
Yeah, go ahead.
There you go.
All right. That's strange. No, I would say 25 years from now, I would want to see the CVE program pretty much entirely automated, to piggyback on what Ken said earlier. CNAs can, log into their portal. They can get any help they need that's, through video or auto or some kind of online mechanism for getting help and support. And they can enter their data, and that data goes into the list. If there's any feedback on that, they automatically receive that as part of their portal. I think, just thinking in terms of streamlining and automation is, 25 years from now, you're going to have potentially thousands of program partners, many thousands. And if it's worldwide, I mean, no one organization, even, MITRE as the secretariat, would have a hard time keeping up with 100,000 CNAs. It's just too much. So I think automation is the key there.
Thanks, Chris. All right, automation. Art, over to you. What do you think? It's going to get harder as we go around, I realize. So
I was going to say, I hope I'm not last, but I could be. Nope, I will build on what Chris said a little bit at least. So yeah, much more automated in a less sort of transactional overhead. You can think of physical world examples where there's an identifier on something. I often cite like vehicle identification numbers of the book thing, ISBN, right? Hey, there's a CVE on something. That means my software system, software vendor, supplier, car manufacturer, whatever, fix some stuff. And, there's a status, and I got an ID to know which ones got fixed this week or month or year, and they're fixed, and this one's open, and a fix is coming or whatever. And that's just sort of normal every day. One more identifier for something that's getting taken care of and managed well. I sort of look forward to that being sort of very lightweight and even more commonplace. I mentioned this in my previous comment, but a truly international globalist system, which gets into the big questions. Probably, for instance, that the U.S. government isn't the sole single supporter of the program. It's probably a big discussion item for 25 years out. I think CVE won't succeed without changes to the overall vulnerability management, ill-defined global system. If for nothing else, this software naming problem needs to be addressed. And it's not CVE's job to do that all by ourselves in our large microcosm, but CVE is part of that conversation. We're not the whole solution, but this automation that Chris and I think are talking about will need some bigger, higher level things to get fixed and improved. We can't just do it all within our program.
Yeah. Wow. Great answer so far. All right, Lisa, you're up next.
Well, I think that building on what everybody said and what Art said earlier, supply chain transparency, and we're all using each other's software now and hardware, and so we have to figure out how to be completely transparent of what we're using, and have we solved the vulnerability? I mean, have we patched against those vulnerabilities? It's on us to do keep our own patching house in order for everybody to believe that we're entirely safe. Not just, we patch our own vulnerabilities, but we got to patch everybody's vulnerabilities included in our software, and that has to be communicated out. And so it's, whether it's VEX, whether it's whatever we come up with after VEX, we're going to have to figure out ways for all the CVE infrastructure to work together and collaborate, and know that we have a non-vulnerable, transparent supply chain.
That's great. Yeah. All right. And Kent, over to you.
All right. So from my perspective, there's a pessimistic answer to this and there's an optimistic answer to this. From my perspective, the pessimistic answer, you heard from those three already. I call it that because we're still dealing with the same problems we're dealing with today, 25 years from now. I hope that the cybersecurity community, the network infrastructure community, and the global community can fix this so that we can put cybersecurity threats away totally and make it in a much more secure foundation for a digital infrastructure. If so, I hope this program goes with it. But the reality is, I'm not sure that's going to happen. So hence the pessimistic answers of we have to integrate at the lowest level of infrastructure that we can get to and make as much automation around it as possible. But I hope that's not necessary and not the case, and that we can finally solve something by terminating the CVE program in 20 years when security is now a fundamental part of our global infrastructure.
We'll add it to the timeline. Kent, always the optimist. Chris, what were you going to say? You're muted again. I don't know.
I'm not muted on my screen.
All right.
We can hear you now.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. Can I also just add that I would hope that in 25 years we have the software and product identification stuff figured out?
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's funny the way Kent articulated it, because it's in my recent past focusing solely on CWE. This is the joke sort of horizon goal that we always have, which is that CWE would put CV out of business, right? If you avoid all these kinds of things, you won't have these CVEs. So hopefully we don't see these repeated problems, but it's not always true. And it's really not I don't know. Kent said 20 years, so we got a target now. So, all right. Well, thank you, everybody. This has been an awesome panel.